There's a level of mental and physical strength that makes people step back when they see you. A level that feels almost supernatural. And today you're going to learn how one man reached it 1,500 years ago, and how you can begin walking that same path. Have you ever met someone who doesn't flinch? Who doesn't panic? Who doesn't hesitate? Someone who steps into chaos with a calm that makes everyone else uncomfortable? Most people look at someone like that and say, "He's lucky. She was born like that. He just has good genetics." But they forget something important. Strength comes with a price most people refuse to pay. But there was one man who paid it completely. Not in Japan, in China, long before the samurai, long before martial arts had belts, trophies, or entertainment value. His name was Bodhidharma, and he didn't just change martial arts. He changed the concept of human potential itself. When he walked into the Shaolin temple, the monks couldn't even sit in meditation without falling asleep. When he left, they were transformed into the most disciplined warriors on earth. And the system he gave them, the method he taught, was simple, brutal, and unforgiving. Before we go deeper, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below. What's your weakest point right now? Mental, physical, or emotional? I read everything, and your comments help this channel reach more people. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The arrival that changed everything. I still remember the weight of the air that morning. Thick, quiet. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know it then, but that was the day my life would split into two parts, before the mountain and after the mountain. The road to the monastery wound through steep cliffs and deep forest, and every step I took made my thoughts louder. I had come here searching for a way to learn faster, think clearer, and push my mind beyond its limits. At that time, I believed learning faster meant memorizing more, working longer hours, or finding some clever technique that would help me outperform everyone else. I didn't realize how shallow that thinking was. Not yet. By the time I reached the entrance gate, my legs were trembling. Not from a climb, but from nerves. The wooden archway towered over me, carved with symbols I couldn't read. A cold gust of wind pushed past, carrying the smell of incense and pine. A monk appeared before I even had the chance to knock. He didn't speak. He didn't bow. He just looked at me with an expression that made me feel like he wasn't looking at my face, but my thoughts. "Why are you here?" he finally asked. His voice was calm and light, but it cut right through me. I had rehearsed a speech on the way up, but suddenly none of it felt right. So I told the truth. I want to learn faster. He studied me for a moment. Everyone wants that. Are you asking for speed or for clarity? I didn't understand the difference. He must have seen the confusion on my face, because he nodded slowly and turned away. "Follow me." We walked through a courtyard where students were practicing slow, deliberate movements. I expected martial arts, but their steps were too soft, too controlled. It looked almost like they were moving through water. Each breath was timed. Each shift of weight seemed intentional. They weren't training their bodies. They were training their minds. The monk led me into a small hall lit by candles. A single mat sat at the center. He pointed to it. "Sit." I obeyed, waiting for instructions. A lesson, a technique, a practice. Instead, he placed a bowl in front of me. "Your first test." Inside the bowl was water, still and clear. I stared at it, unsure what I was supposed to do. "Watch," he said. That was it. Watch. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then 20. Then 30. My legs started aching. My thoughts wandered. Did I come all this way to stare at a bowl? Was this some kind of joke? My mind complained, resisted, grasped for stimulation. I tried to focus, but every small sound distracted me. Every shift in my breath pulled my attention away. After an hour, the monk finally spoke. "You want to learn fast, but your mind is restless. You want clarity, yet your thoughts control you. You want power, but you cannot even command your attention for more than a moment." I felt embarrassed, like I had failed a simple task. But he wasn't finished. "You came searching for knowledge. But knowledge is not the problem. The problem is your state. Information enters a chaotic mind and becomes noise. He tapped the bowl lightly. A ripple spread across the surface. This is your mind. Then he waited for it to settle. When the water stilled again, he tapped it once more. This is how you live and how you learn. I watched the ripples fade. The surface returned to calm. And for a moment, so did something inside me. Jing, he said quietly. The stillness of essence. Without Jing, there is no focus. Without focus, there is no learning. You say you want to learn 10 times faster, but you haven't learned how to slow down. You want strength, but you have no foundation. He walked behind me and stood silently. Today, you arrived at this mountain, he said, but your mind hasn't arrived yet. The room fell quiet again. I didn't have a reply. His words felt less like a lesson and more like a mirror showing me everything I had been ignoring. He finally asked, "Do you still want to continue?" I swallowed hard. Yes. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Then understand this. You are not here to learn tricks. You are here to rebuild the way you exist. I nodded, even though I didn't fully grasp what he meant. He knelt beside me. The mind you brought with you today cannot take you where you want to go. If you try to learn with it, you will always struggle. If you try to focus with it, you will always drift. If you try to improve with it, you will always feel stuck. He pointed to the bowl one last time. Your journey begins when the water becomes still. Then he walked away, leaving me alone in that quiet hall, staring at my reflection in the bowl. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something important shift inside me. A small spark. A realization I couldn't yet put into words. That day didn't give me the answers I came for. Instead, it dismantled the way I thought about learning, discipline, and the mind itself. It showed me that all the speed in the world means nothing if the mind is divided. It taught me that real mastery doesn't start when you read more or work harder, but when you learn how to see what's happening inside yourself. And that was the day everything changed. Not because I found a technique, but because I finally understood that the old version of me had reached its limit. If I wanted to become someone capable of true mental power, I would have to begin with the foundation the monk hinted at. Jing, the stillness beneath everything. The place where learning truly begins. Chapter 2. The Lessons I Never Saw Coming. The next morning started long before sunrise. A bell echoed across the courtyard, low and steady, and I woke with a tight feeling in my chest. I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying the monk's words from the day before. Your mind hasn't arrived yet. It stung, mostly because it felt true. When I stepped outside, the air was cold enough to bite. The sky was still dark, but the monks were already moving across the courtyard. Some swept the ground with long bamboo brooms. Others carried buckets of water. No one spoke, yet nothing felt silent. There was a rhythm to everything they did, like the entire monastery breathed in one slow, unified motion. The monk from yesterday, Master Liang, found me standing near the entrance. He didn't ask how I slept or whether I was ready. He simply gestured for me to follow. We walked to a small pavilion overlooking the valley. The horizon was just beginning to glow with a faint strip of orange. Today, he said, you will learn to see what your eyes ignore. He handed me a long wooden staff. It wasn't for fighting. It was too smooth, too light, almost delicate. What do I do with it? I asked. Hold it, he replied. So I held it. Simple enough. But then he said, now balance it perfectly on your palm. I placed the base on my hand. The staff wobbled. I adjusted. It wobbled again. I kept shifting, trying to correct it. Each time I fixed one side, it tipped the other way. Master Liang watched silently. After a few minutes, I felt sweat forming on my forehead. My arm tightened. My mind worked faster, trying to calculate micro-adjustments. My thoughts spun around what I needed to fix, what I should change, how to predict the next movement. Finally, he said, you're chasing it. I'm trying to control it, I argued. No, he said. You're reacting. He stepped closer and placed his hand lightly on the staff, steadying it instantly. You think learning faster comes from controlling more. But the more you try to control, the more chaotic things become. I stared at the staff, now calm in his hand. Then what should I be doing? Listening. He removed his hand. The staff stood balanced on his palm. No wobble. No struggle. How I started. Jing, he said, tapping the center of his forehead. You're trying to force stillness internally while moving frantically inside. You want to learn fast, but your attention is scattered. Your mind burns energy on everything except what matters. He let the staff fall into his other hand. A mind that reacts is slow. A mind that listens becomes fast. It felt like another one of his riddles. But before I could ask anything else, he pointed at the staff again. Try. I placed it on my palm a second time. This time, instead of trying to command it, I let it rest. I watched it, not with urgency, but with awareness. I tried to quiet the chatter in my head. For a moment, something clicked. The staff slowed. My hand adjusted without panic. My breathing evened out. It didn't stay balanced for long, but those few seconds were enough for him to nod. Good. You felt the difference. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't even improvement. It was more like catching a glimpse of a truth I had never noticed. He motioned for me to sit, and we watched the sun rise. The valley glowed gold, and the mountains looked like silent giants guarding the world. Why balance a stick? I finally asked. His eyes stayed on the horizon. Because your mind is the same. It wobbles. It reacts. It tries to predict. It fears losing control. Jing is the art of aligning attention with reality instead of wrestling with it. He picked up the staff and spun it with one hand. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they scatter their energy. They jump at every thought, every distraction, every emotion. Their learning becomes a fight instead of a flow. He set the staff down beside him. When your mind becomes still, you stop fighting. And when you stop fighting, you start learning. I thought about how I studied back home. Constant switching, frantic focus, crushing pressure. It all made sense now. I wasn't actually learning. I was wrestling with my own mind. Master Liang stood and motioned for me to follow him again. We walked to a narrow stone staircase that led to a terrace overlooking the entire valley. There, several monks sat in silent meditation. A few stood holding buckets of water with outstretched arms, perfectly still. What are they doing? I asked. Training Jing, he said. They are practicing the stillness beneath action. One monk had a bowl of water resting on his head. The surface didn't ripple once. You will train here today. He pointed to an empty space on the terrace. I walked over and sat down. The stone was cold against my legs. My thoughts were already buzzing. He placed a small cup of water in front of me. Watch it, he said. I laughed softly. Another bowl? He nodded. Stillness begins with repetition. We train the basics until the basics disappear. So I watched. Again. This time, something changed. Instead of waiting for a lesson or expecting enlightenment, I simply observed. The cup, the water, the faint shimmer as the wind brushed past, the subtle vibrations in the ground as footsteps moved behind me. Slowly, the noise in my head began to fade. Not completely, but enough for me to notice the mountain air settling in my lungs. An hour passed, then another. My back hurt, but I didn't break focus. I didn't chase thoughts. I didn't react. I let the mind settle like dust on a quiet floor. Master Liang eventually returned. What did you see? He asked. Everything, I said without thinking. He smiled. Good. That means your mind has started to arrive. I didn't feel smarter. I didn't feel faster. But I felt something shift, like I had stepped into a different dimension of awareness. A slower one. A clearer one. This wasn't the lesson I expected when I came to the monastery. I thought learning faster meant stacking techniques and squeezing more information into my head. Instead, I was learning how to clear the space inside my mind so new knowledge could actually land. Before we left the terrace, he gave me one final instruction. Tomorrow we begin Qi. Do not come with yesterday's mind. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and the air turned cold again, I realized something important. These lessons weren't just training me to learn faster. They were changing who I was. Chapter 3. The Gate of Chi that I never knew existed. The next morning, I woke before the bell. The air felt different, lighter, sharper. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was the way my mind had settled the day before, but something inside me felt ready. Not excited, not anxious, just steady. When I stepped outside, the sky was still dark, and a thin layer of mist hovered above the courtyard stones. The monks moved through it like shadows. Nothing about their pace ever changed. They didn't rush. They didn't drag. They flowed. Chi, the lesson Master Liang had promised. He met me near the entrance, hands clasped behind his back. "Your mind has begun to settle," he said. "Today, we begin the work of movement." I expected something mystical, maybe breath work or strange hand positions. Instead, he handed me a bucket, just like the ones the monks carried yesterday. It was filled with water to the brim. "Hold this," he said. I lifted it. It was heavy, heavier than I expected. "Walk," he instructed. "Where?" I asked. He pointed toward the long staircase carved into the mountain. It stretched upward like a spine disappearing into the clouds. "You want me to climb that?" I asked. He nodded once, without spilling. I stared at him, waiting for the joke. There wasn't one. The first few steps were easy. The bucket pulled at my shoulder, but I managed. A small ripple broke across the surface of the water. I adjusted my grip. Another ripple, then another. The more I tried to keep it steady, the more it moved. Master Liang walked beside me, hands empty. "You're trying to freeze the water," he said. "Just like your thoughts yesterday." "I'm trying not to drop it," I muttered. "But the water is not the problem." Halfway up the stairs, my arm began to burn. My breath shortened. The bucket shook slightly, sending a few drops over the edge. I cursed under my breath. He stopped walking and said, "Chi is not about strength. It is about continuity." The word hung in the cold air. Continuity of what? I asked. Attention, breath, intention, all flowing in one direction. When these are scattered, your movements become wasted. When they align, even difficult things feel light. Easier said than done. But I tried. I shifted my focus from my arm to my breathing. I slowed it, matched it with the rhythm of my steps. I loosened the tension in my grip without letting the bucket fall. The water began to respond, not because it obeyed, but because I stopped fighting it. Something inside me steadied. The climb became slower but smoother. The water stopped splashing and began to sway in a gentle rhythm that matched my breath. "You see," Master Liang said, "Chi is the bridge between the mind and the body. Without Chi, Jing has no movement. Without Jing, Chi has no direction." I didn't fully understand. Not yet. But I felt something shift, a tiny crack in the wall between effort and ease. When we reached the top, my arm was shaking, but the water was nearly full. Only a thin trail had spilled along the way. He looked at the bucket and nodded. "Good. Now you're ready." "For what?" I asked. "For the first exercise in real Chi." He led me to a small flat platform overlooking the valley. The mist was lifting, revealing the vast mountains stretching across the horizon. The wind was cool, almost sharp. He placed the bucket on the ground and stood a few feet away. "Chi," he said, "is the movement of intent through the body. Not force, not tension, intent." He drew a slow circle in the air with his hand. The movement was small, but something about it felt powerful. His arm didn't jerk. It didn't stiffen. It flowed, as if the motion started somewhere deeper than muscle. "Now you," he said. I mirrored the gesture. My circle looked nothing like his. Too stiff, too tight, too self-conscious. He shook his head. "You're performing, not expressing." "What's the difference?" I asked. "Performance comes from outside. Expression comes from within." He stepped behind me and placed 2 fingers lightly between my shoulder blades. "Start here," he said. "Move from this point." From the center of my back, it felt strange, but I tried. I let the movement begin from a deeper place inside me instead of from my hand. The motion felt heavier at first, but somehow cleaner, more connected. "That is qi," he said quietly. "Just that." I asked, "That tiny difference?" He nodded. "Qi is subtle, but small things become large when repeated thousands of times." We practiced movement after movement, slow steps, turning motions, shifting weight from one foot to the other. It felt like learning to walk all over again. Every correction he made brought the same message. Not tension. Flow. You're thinking too much. Don't push the motion. Follow it. Again and again. Sometimes he would tap my shoulder or my ribs, guiding the direction of the movement. Sometimes he would walk circles around me, watching the way my body responded. "You learn fast," he finally said. I laughed softly. "It doesn't feel fast." That's because speed is not about movement. It's about alignment. When your mind and body stop arguing, learning becomes simple. We trained until the sun climbed high. The mist was gone. The valley was clear, bright, sharp. My clothes were damp with sweat, but my mind felt strangely calm. It wasn't the stillness of meditation. It was a different kind of silence. A silence with direction. As we walked back down the mountain, I asked him, "Why do monks train qi before learning anything else?" He paused for a moment before answering. "Because a scattered person can never learn deeply. They can remember facts. They can memorize. They can pass tests. But true learning requires the whole being, not just the mind. Qi makes learning a full body experience. When qi is strong, you don't just learn faster. You absorb." That word, absorb, stayed with me. When we reached the courtyard, he added one more thing. "Tomorrow we begin Shun. You are not ready for it, but you will be." "What is Shun?" I asked. He looked up at the mountains before answering. "The mind beyond the mind." A small shiver ran through me, not from fear, from knowing the next step would be something I had never touched before. And for the first time since arriving at the monastery, I felt something new. Not confusion, not frustration, readiness. Chapter 4. The Awakening I Didn't Expect. The morning after the storm felt strangely quiet, almost staged, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Mist clung to the ground like thin silk, drifting between the ancient pine trees. The temple bells hadn't rung yet, and the monks were still inside their quarters. But I was already awake, sitting on the worn stone steps with the cold air brushing against my skin. I didn't feel rested. I felt charged, as if something inside me had been unplugged for years and had just been connected again. And this wasn't motivation or inspiration. It wasn't a sudden desire to train harder. It was something deeper, something I didn't have words for yet. When the elder monk stepped out of the hall, he looked at me with a calm surprise. "You woke before the bell," he said. "I couldn't sleep," I answered. "That is normal," he replied. "Your mind has begun to notice itself." I didn't understand what he meant, and maybe he saw that on my face because he smiled and motioned for me to follow him. We walked behind the temple toward a small courtyard I hadn't seen before. There was nothing there except a single wooden bucket filled with clear water and a round stone slab placed in the center. "When a person starts to wake up inside," he said, "their mind becomes louder. Many mistake it for anxiety. Others mistake it for restlessness. But it is neither. It is the mind becoming aware that it has been asleep." I watched the surface of the water. It was perfectly still, reflecting the faint red of the rising sun. "Sit," he instructed. I sat on the cold stone. The elder monk placed the wooden bucket beside me. "What do you see?" he asked. "Water," I said. "And my reflection." He waited. "And the sky behind me." He nodded. "Good. This means your eyes are open. Now we open the mind." He dipped his hand into the bucket and sprinkled a few drops onto the stone slab. The water broke the perfect reflection. "What do you see now?" he asked again. "Just shapes," I said. "Blurred." "And this," he said gently, "is how most people live. Their mind is always disturbed, always reacting, always shaking. They cannot see truth because the water is never still." He placed the bucket in front of me. For the next hour, you will try to still the water with your mind. I almost laughed. With my mind? Yes. Not by force. By presence. I didn't fully know what that meant, but I closed my eyes and tried. I breathed slowly. The cold air entered my lungs in thin, sharp threads. I waited for the water to settle. But the more I watched, the more it moved. My thoughts were racing. Scenes from yesterday's training came back. The pain, the pressure, the monk's questions, the storm outside, the doubts that crawled inside me, and every thought seemed to ripple across the water. I can't stop it, I said. You are still trying to control it, he replied. Awakening does not happen by force. It happens by understanding. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You cannot silence the mind by pushing against it. You silence it by seeing through it. Seeing through it? I repeated. He pointed to the ripples on the water. Each ripple is a thought. You think you must remove the ripples. But the truth is simpler. You must become the sky reflected in the water, not the ripples that disturb it. I stared at the water again. Thoughts will always come, he continued. But when the mind awakens, thoughts lose their power to move you. They pass through you the way wind passes through bamboo. I took a slow breath. This time, instead of fighting my thoughts, I watched them. Not as intruders, not as problems to solve, but simply as passing shapes. A memory rose. I didn't hold it. A fear surfaced. I didn't resist it. A doubt appeared. I didn't argue with it. Little by little, something inside me loosened. I wasn't forcing silence. I was letting silence arrive. And then, without warning, the water became still. Not perfectly still, but still enough for the sky to appear again. I felt something shift inside my chest, subtle but undeniable, like a knot that had been tight for years suddenly letting go. The elder monk nodded. This is the first sign of Shun awakening, he said. The mind begins to see itself, and once it sees itself, it can no longer be fooled by the noise inside. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The feeling was overwhelming but peaceful. Most people, he continued, spend their lives fighting their thoughts. They run from them or chase them. They build identities out of them. They drown in them. They never realize that a thought is just a shadow on the surface of the water. He tapped the bucket lightly. When the mind awakens, shadows lose their power. We sat there in silence. The courtyard was empty except for the bucket, the stone, and the early morning sun warming the edges of the temple roof. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to observe without reacting, to feel without being consumed, to think without being trapped. The monk stood. The path ahead will challenge you, he said, not because it is difficult, but because you are still learning to trust what you have awakened. What happens now? I asked. He looked at me with a calm, steady expression. Now, he said, your training truly begins. He turned and walked toward the hall. I stayed on the stone slab a bit longer. I watched the water. I watched the sky. I watched myself inside the reflection. For the first time, the surface didn't lie. For the first time, I wasn't scared of what I saw. For the first time, my mind felt like something I could walk into without getting lost. The awakening wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was a quiet unfolding, a door opening inside the mind, a light that had always been there, finally allowed to shine. And that light, gentle, steady, patient, changed everything. Chapter 5, where the old self finally broke. The next morning, the training ground felt different. Not because anything around me had changed, but because something inside me had. The air was cold, the pine trees were still dripping with dew, and the faint smell of incense drifted from the temple hall. But I wasn't the same person who had walked this path days ago. The elder monk stood waiting near the wooden gate, hands behind his back, watching me approach with a calm, unreadable expression. You look lighter, he said. I feel different, I admitted. He nodded once and gestured toward the long stone path leading uphill. The same path I had struggled up on the first day. The same path where I had felt my limits crush me. The same path where my thoughts had screamed at me to quit. We will walk, he said, But the test is not the path. It is what the path brings out of you. We started walking in silence. The stones were uneven, and every few steps my feet slid slightly from the moisture. On the first day, this had irritated me. Today, I simply noticed it without reacting. The monk glanced at me. "Do you see the difference?" he asked. "I'm aware of the discomfort," I said, "but it doesn't control me." "That is because you are no longer fighting the experience. You are seeing it." We walked higher. A thin fog was beginning to wrap around the trees, turning everything pale white. The air grew colder. My breath rose like smoke. At the halfway point, the monk stopped and turned to me. "Tell me," he asked, "what is the difference between the person who suffers and the person who does not?" I thought for a moment. "Perspective." "Close," he said. "The difference is attachment. One is tied to every thought and feeling. The other watches the thoughts come and go." He raised his hand and pointed toward the fog. "Your old self still lives in that mist. It reacts, fears, doubts, resists. And as long as you identify with it, you suffer." "How do I let it go?" I asked. "You don't let it go," he said. "You let it fade by seeing through it." We continued walking until we reached a cliff overlooking the valley. The clouds below were thick, hiding everything except the peaks of distant mountains. The monk stood at the edge, breathing slowly. "This," he said, "is where your old self breaks." He pointed to a flat stone near the cliff. "Sit." I sat cross-legged. The cold from the rock seeped through my clothes. The wind brushed against my face. The vast silence around us seemed endless. "Close your eyes," he instructed. I did. "Now," he said, "face the mind you have lived with all your life. Do not silence it. Do not control it. Simply watch it." At first, everything felt calm. But within seconds, it began. A rush of old memories, moments of failure, regrets, fears, conversations I regretted, people I missed, expectations I had carried since childhood, thoughts I didn't even know were still buried inside me. They rose like waves crashing into each other. My breathing grew faster. "Do not run," the monk said, his voice steady. "Awakening is not about escaping the mind. It is about seeing the mind clearly without being dragged by it." The thoughts grew louder. A fear shot through me, irrational but powerful. "What if I lose myself?" I whispered. "That is the idea," he said gently. "The self you fear losing is the one built on noise." I took a shaky breath. Images flashed across my mind. Times I had doubted myself. Times I had blamed others. Times I had avoided discomfort. All the weakness. All the excuses. All the fear. And instead of pushing them away, I let them appear. One by one. Without judgment. Without resistance. "They are only shadows," the monk said. "You have spent your life believing they were solid." Something inside me trembled. Not physically. More like a crack forming in a wall I had carried for years. The thoughts kept rising, but something was different now. They were no longer pulling me. I wasn't drowning in them. I was watching them. A slow warmth spread in my chest. The waves softened. The noise faded. The fears lost their grip. The regrets became small shapes drifting away in a vast open space. I felt lighter, clearer, empty in a peaceful way. "Now," the monk said quietly, "open your eyes." I opened them. The fog had lifted, revealing the valley below. Rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the mountains like golden threads. "What you feel right now," he said, "is not strength. It is clarity. Strength will come later. But clarity is the beginning of true power." He sat down beside me. "When the old self breaks, you don't become someone new. You become who you were before the noise." I exhaled slowly. My mind felt open, like a window that had been shut for years. The tension in my body had disappeared. Even the cold air felt different, fresh, alive. The monk stood. "Come, there is still more to learn." I rose to my feet. As we walked back toward the temple, I realized something simple but life-changing. My mind wasn't an enemy anymore. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a tool. a tool I could finally use instead of fear. And that realization changed everything. As we returned to the temple grounds, the bells finally rang across the courtyard. The monks were gathering for evening practice. The sky above the mountains glowed soft orange, and for the first time since arriving here, I felt completely present. Not pulled by thoughts, not trapped in old patterns. Just here. The elder monk placed a hand on my shoulder. "You have taken your first real step," he said. "Not toward becoming stronger, but toward becoming awake." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The quiet inside me said enough. He looked toward the temple hall. Most people spend their whole lives looking outward, chasing achievements, collecting distractions, hiding from discomfort. But none of that brings freedom. Freedom only comes when you understand the mind watching all of it. I nodded. "You came here searching for strength," he continued. "But what you needed was clarity. Strength without clarity destroys. Clarity without strength fades. But when both rise together, a person becomes unshakable." I felt those words settle deep inside me, not as motivation, as truth. The monk turned to leave, but before he stepped away, he said something I'll never forget. "You are no longer the person who arrived here. But do not cling to this version either. The mind must keep awakening, or it will fall asleep again." And then he walked toward the hall, robes moving gently with the wind. I stayed behind for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the mountain ridge. The valley below was calm. The air smelled of pine and incense. And in that stillness, I understood the simple lesson the monk had been guiding me towards since the beginning. Awakening isn't a moment. It's a direction, a way of living where the mind is clear, the self is light, and awareness leads instead of fear. As I stepped into the hall, joining the monks in silence, I realized the journey wasn't ending here. It was beginning.